senior doctors have become the first to face medical license suspension regarding the massive walkout by trainees protesting the government's medical reform. President Yoon is doubling down on the plan to boost the medical school admissions quota. On the second day of the Summit for Democracy in the South Korean capital, making young people's voices heard for the future of democracy was highlighted, especially in the digital era. Israeli forces raided Gaza's major hospital on Monday, reportedly killing over 20 gunmen. U.S. President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke over the phone over Israel's operation in Rafah for the first time in about a month amid the growing friction between them. It's March 19, 2024. This is Newscenter.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. Two senior doctors have become the first to face license suspension in connection to the massive walkout by junior doctors against the government's medical reform. They've vowed to take their case to court, and their junior counterparts have pledged to do the same. Park Go-nu leads us off.
The Health Ministry sent on Monday the first notifications of license suspension to two senior doctors. Those doctors, Park Myung-ha and Kim Tae-gu, who are both leaders of an emergency committee at the Korea Medical Association, were given final suspension notices of 3 months, running from April 15th to July 14th. The ministry said Park and Kim were given the suspensions as they have been supporting the walkout of junior doctors. Park says the walkout was a result of voluntary action by trainee doctors individually, and that he will take legal action. Trainee doctors are also preparing to take legal action, as they will also start receiving suspension notices from next Monday. Over 2,000 male medical school students who have been on a leave of absence as a protest against plans for expanding the medical school admission quota have, according to a recent survey, shown willingness to join the military as a regular enlisted soldier rather than as a medical officer or public health doctor. The survey was conducted by the Korea Association of Medical Colleges with around 5,000 students responding. Around 400 of those students were reported to already have applied for enlistment, which is in contrast to only 200 medical school students enlisted as a serving soldier 2 years ago. And medical school professors from universities including Seoul National University and Yonsei University are set to submit their resignations next Monday. But during a daily briefing on Tuesday, the Health Ministry asked the professors to persuade junior doctors to return to work.
That is the right thing to do as a doctor and a professor, to make them return to the medical field instead of doing the wrong thing and following the students who irresponsibly left their patients.
The official added that the government is widely open for dialogue to listen to their voices and making policies based on their opinions. Also at the briefing, the government announced additional support of around 2 trillion won, or roughly $1.5 billion for the medical field. It added more support will be given to medical teams when deployed in emergency treatment and surgeries that require harder work. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
Amid the prolonged standoff with junior doctors, President Yoon doubled down on the plan to expand the medical school quotas. He also noted to form a special committee for medical reform next month for dialogue. Shin Se-byuk reports.
Calling medical reform the government's duty to the people, President Yoon said in a cabinet meeting on Tuesday that medical licenses should never be used as a tool against the people.
국민의 생명을 살리기 위해 부여된 의사 면허를 국민을 위협하고 불안하게 만드는 수단으로 사용해서는 안 됩니다.
Yoon's remarks came as South Korea now enters the 5th week of a standoff between the government and junior doctors who are protesting against the administration's plan to increase the medical school quota by 2,000 starting in 2025. Yoon also made clear that the government would not back down on its plan. The government clarified that its decision to expand the number of medical school seats was based on the minimum needed to address South Korea's swiftly aging population, grounding its decision in scientific and objective data. Additionally, the president dismissed the medical community's calls for a complete reassessment of the plan. He argued such demands won't garner public support and would hinder healthcare reform efforts.
단계적 접근이나 증원 연기로는 국민의 생명을 살리고 지역과 필수 의료 붕괴를 막는 의료 개혁을 결코 추진할 수 없습니다.
Yoon also addressed the medical community's concerns about a decline in healthcare quality with more doctors. He countered that more professionals would rather foster greater growth and enhance the overall capacity of the healthcare industry. Meanwhile, the formation of a special committee to assess medical reform was also announced at Tuesday's meeting. President Yoon said the committee will launch in April to engage doctors and experts in dialogue as the government pushes for structural improvements in the current delivery system. With the participation of doctors' groups, Yoon said he hopes constructive talks will take place rather than conflict. The president added that he will also address medical reform in his ongoing series of public policy discussions with citizens across the nation. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Speaking with citizens today, President Yoon vows to achieve innovating the nation's capital by tackling housing costs and redeveloping old neighborhoods. In line with that, the president says he'll abolish a real estate policy linked to property taxes. Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
The second miracle on the Han River. That's what President Yoon Suk-yeol called his plans to innovate the nation's capital during a policy discussion with citizens on Tuesday at an art center in the city's old industrial district of Yeongdeung-pogu.
과거 한강의 기적이 대한민국 성장과 번영의 역사를 상징한다면 새롭게 일으킬 제2의 한강의 기적은 서울의 도시 혁신이 될 것입니다. 대한민국 수도 서울을 파리, 뉴욕, 런던을 넘어서는 글로벌 인류 도시로 발전시켜 국가 제도약의 발판으로 삼아야 합니다.
His plan includes changes to the nation's real estate market to tackle rising rent and the complex methods of redevelopment. Most notably, President Yoon said he will abolish a real estate policy whereby the government gradually raises its declared property values, which he says has meant higher punitive taxing on homeowners, leading to rising rent costs. He also said in 2 years, 100,000 small to medium-sized homes will be available for rent to provide affordable housing. For his redevelopment plan dubbed New Village Project, older, often overlooked multi-home residential buildings known as villas in Korea will be redeveloped into modern townhouses. Loan opportunities will be provided for them. Government funding will help pay for CCTV, parks, and parking lots in these areas with 10 trillion Korean won pledged over the next 10 years. That's nearly $7.5 billion US.
그동안 집을 다시 짓고 싶어도 엄두조차 낼 수 없었지만 이제 몇 가구만 모여도 뉴빌 사업을 통해 깨끗한 새 집과 편리한 커뮤니티 시설을 누릴 수 있습니다. 올 하반기부터 바로 시범 사업 공모를 시작하여 내년부터 본격적으로 사업에 착수할 것입니다.
He also mentioned the cultural aspect by saying that more locations are needed where artists can exhibit or perform what they've worked on, emphasizing the role of creativity from culture.
서울의 이런 문화 인프라를 강화시키는 거는 이제 서울은 경제, 금융 이런 분야로는 세계적으로 손꼽습니다. 그런데 이게 세계적인 도시가 되려고 하면 결국은 문화 인프라가 이거를 좌우합니다.
In the meantime, President Yoon said what's discussed doesn't just apply to Seoul. The new policies and infrastructure that need to be improved also go to the rest of the country. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's low birth rate and aging population are posing a threat to economic growth as the country's workforce is expected to start declining in 2028. That's according to the Korea Employment Information Service on Tuesday, saying the economically active population would grow by around 316,000 between 2022 and 2032. This is only a tenth of the growth recorded in the previous 10 years, mainly because of an aging society where a fifth of the population is expected to be aged over 65 by 2025. The agency says while the healthcare industry is expected to boom as a result. Growing online and automated services will lead to declines in the retail and manufacturing industries. Findings for the month of February show an on-year decline in auto exports, but government officials remain optimistic as export value hit above $5 billion. Lee Soo-jin explains.
South Korea's auto exports once again surpassed the $5 billion mark last month, but were unable to set new records. According to data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Tuesday, the value of car exports came to $5.2 billion in February. This, however, is a 7.8% drop compared to the previous year. The ministry said this was mostly due to fewer working days as the Lunar New Year holiday was in February this year. The base effect was also a factor as outbound shipments of cars in February 2023 rose a whopping 47% on year to record what was at the time the highest ever monthly exports. The cumulative value of auto exports so far for the first 2 months of the year stands at $11.4 billion, up 7.5% on year. The cumulative domestic sales of cars, however, fell nearly 12% on year and more than 20% for the month of February. But the ministry remains optimistic as it expects production to resume at Hyundai Motors' Ulsan and Asan plants, as well as electric vehicle subsidies to boost domestic demand. Domestic production levels last month were down 13.6% on year from fewer working days and the temporary suspension of certain vehicle production plants. Still, over 300,000 cars were produced for the 18th consecutive month. And on-year drops were also seen in exports and domestic sales of eco-friendly cars. In terms of units, slightly more than 50,000 vehicles were sold overseas, an almost 14% decrease compared to the previous year. The value of these exports came to around $1.7 billion, down 15% on year. And domestic sales of eco-friendly cars were also down in February, falling nearly 12% from a year earlier to around 40,000 units. The Trade Ministry thus plans to work with other related ministries to make changes to current regulations that will boost investment in eco-friendly cars as well as overall vehicle exports. It will also allocate 442.5 billion won, or around $330 million, to the auto R&D budget for this year to enhance the domestic auto industry's competitiveness in the global market. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Over in Japan, its central bank hiked its interest rates for the first time since 2007. According to local media, the Bank of Japan announced on Tuesday that it was ending its negative interest rate policy, which was aimed at negative 0.1% to a range of 0% to 0.1%. The central bank also abolished its yield curve control policy for 10-year Japanese government bonds, which was put in place to maintain financial stability. The decision to end aggressive monetary easing policies comes amid a rise in corporate wages to their highest in 33 years, as well as continuing inflation. On the second day of the Summit for Democracy taking place in Seoul, highlighted was making young people's voices heard for the future of democracy, especially in the digital era. Our Kim Jong-shin was there.
The second day began with an opening ceremony under the theme Democracy for Future Generations. Government delegates and experts from around the world gathered for the opening ceremony in Seoul. One of the main coordinators for the event, East Asia Institute senior fellow Lee Suk-jung, told us why the second day was dedicated to the young.
I think the future of democracy depends on the young generations. So therefore, inviting them to speak for their own stake is very important for the resilient democracies. So in that purpose, the third summit, the overall theme is democracy for future generations.
On this day, various workshops were available to participants with themes including global democracy coalitions, politics, youth empowerment, and digital technology, among others. I'm standing in front of one of the 60 workshops or similar events taking place here at COEX on the second day. And majority of these are focused on giving a platform to young people from all over the world to speak, as they are the present and future of democracy. The third such U.S.-led summit is being held outside the U.S. for the first time this year. Thomas Garrett, the Secretary General for Community of Democracies, a partner for the U.S. government's Youth Democracy Network, sat down with Arirang News.
We're always very impressed by the role of the people, of the masses in South Korea, from things like the Candlelight Revolution. You know, we're here for the summit of democracy. And one of the interesting things was when this process started, the U.S. President Joe Biden said, we need champions for democracy. And I think Korea has proven that over and over, but very much proven that they are a champion for democracy with this third summit.
Secretary General Garrett added that young people are needed to revitalize democracy, especially in a time of social media that's changing the digital technology landscape. He said it is the voices of young people that are going to keep democracy alive and fresh for the next 75 years. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Israeli forces raided Gaza's major hospital on Monday, reportedly killing over 20 gunmen. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the war for the first time in about a month. Chung Eun-ju has the latest.
Israeli troops raided the compound of Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital early on Monday, saying they killed over 20 gunmen. The Israeli military said special forces conducted the operation based on intelligence that the hospital was again being used by Hamas leaders. A spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces said troops had been instructed on the importance of operating cautiously. Palestinian health authorities, however, said the operation caused multiple casualties and led to a fire in one of the buildings. Al-Shifa, the Gaza Strip's biggest hospital before the war, is now one of the only healthcare facilities that is even partially operational in the north of the territory and is housing hundreds of displaced civilians. Hamas said in a statement the Israeli military had committed a new crime by directly targeting the hospital buildings without caring about patients, medical staff, or the displaced people. The Director General of the World Health Organization on Monday said in a post on X, formerly Twitter, that the WHO is terribly worried about the situation there and hospitals should never be battlegrounds. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in their first call since mid-February. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters on Monday that while President Biden remains committed to the goal of defeating Hamas, he communicated to the Israeli Prime Minister that a major assault on Rafah would be a mistake and would deepen anarchy in Gaza. Sullivan told reporters the two countries would have a comprehensive discussion on the way forward in Gaza. Sullivan further described the call as businesslike, but said President Biden had refuted straw-man arguments put forward by the Israeli leader. Ties between Netanyahu and Biden have reportedly grown increasingly strained in recent months. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
In Russia, elected for a fifth term at the top office, Vladimir Putin has made his victory speech noting the occupied territory of Ukraine. His global counterparts shared mixed reactions. Lee Seung-jae has more.
In a landslide victory, Russian President Vladimir Putin won his fifth term in office. Taking over 87% of the votes, the election victory solidifies Putin's power even further, allowing him to stay in office until at least 2030. Marking the 10th anniversary of the annexation of Crimea, Putin delivered his first speech since his election victory, where he called the occupied territory of Ukraine returned territory. He also noted the 4 occupied territories of Ukraine that took part in the recent presidential elections.
Regarding Novorossiya and Donbass, people who lived there during the Russian spring expressed their will to return to their family as well. Their way to the homeland was much more grave and tragic, but in the end we did it. It is a big event in the history of our country.
However, the Russian presidential election was met with heavy condemnation by the international community. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said given the fact that Putin has imprisoned his political opponents and prevented others from running against him, this election was clearly neither free nor fair. Josep Borrell, the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security, criticized the result, describing the election as being based on repression and intimidation. The German Foreign Ministry pointed out through its social media X that Russia's fake election was neither free nor fair. Most vocal was Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who slammed Russia for pretending to hold an election. There were also claims that the election was illegal, citing issues such as the fact that transparent ballot boxes were used and that voting was conducted in 4 occupied territories in Ukraine. China, India, and North Korea offered congratulations. Meanwhile, European Union foreign ministers on Monday agreed to impose sanctions on people and organizations responsible for the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said that about 30 individuals and entities will be sanctioned. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Back here at home, the Defense Ministry has shared its action plan for this year to better address evolving security concerns, namely North Korea's hostile weapons ambitions. Choi Min-jung has details.
South Korea's Defense Ministry has announced 3 major tasks for this year to make the country a global pivotal state that embodies peace through strength. First, to boost the country's military, the ministry will prioritize strengthening response capabilities against North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. This will be done by advancing South Korea's space technology in the defense sector. Seoul successfully launched its first military reconnaissance satellite last December and plans to launch 2 more this year, one in April and another in November. The country will also deploy a newly developed homegrown tactical surface-to-surface missile which can precisely strike the regime's command facilities for the very first time this year. The ministry also aims to expand the scope of defense cooperation with countries that share the same values. Last year, South Korea and the U.S. established the Nuclear Consultative Group to strengthen extended deterrence against nuclear threats posed by the North. This year, the 2 sides will establish joint nuclear operation guidelines, conduct exercises and training that mimic the response to a North Korean nuclear attack, and expand the deployment of U.S. strategic assets on the peninsula. Lastly, the ministry plans to boost strategic defense capabilities through the K-defense industry. It explained that if South Korea's defense exports and production cooperation increase, a supply of Korean-made weapons and ammunition would be available from overseas. These could be utilized in times of emergency and would also generate economic growth. South Korea also said it will make efforts for the signing of the Reciprocal Defense Procurement Agreement between Seoul and Washington to help ease trade barriers for bilateral arms exports. Defense Minister Shin Won-sik said that the ministry will do its best to ensure that national defense also helps the nation's economy. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
It was very windy all over the country today. With wind and rain, daytime temperatures were slightly below the usual levels. Tomorrow will continue to be a bit chilly. Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, the temperature in the morning in Seoul is expected to drop to 0 degrees Celsius, with the last cold snap in full swing. Rain and snow will mostly subside overnight, but on the East Coast, it will continue until tomorrow afternoon. After the rain stops, cold air will come in again. A preliminary heavy snow warning has been issued with up to 20 centimeters forecast in the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province and up to 8 in the mountainous areas of northeastern Gyeongsang-buk-do province by tomorrow. Please be extra careful to avoid accidents. Tomorrow, Chuncheon will start off at -1 degree Celsius. Daily highs in Chuncheon and Seoul will move up to 9 degrees, Busan 13 degrees Celsius. Rain will make a return on Friday and over the weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's lying? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
everyone, welcome. You've tuned in to Arirang's Within the Frame. I'm Handan in Seoul. The Summit for Democracy, a U.S.-led initiative that aims to protect democracy and freedom worldwide, kicked off in Seoul on Monday under the tagline, Democracy for Future Generations. South Korea's hosting of the summit, the third of its kind, comes as the country attempts to position itself as a global leader in expanding democratic values and preventing the erosion of rights amid growing assaults around the world. Tonight, we take a closer look into the global event taking place right here in Seoul and its global implications. For that, we have Choi Hyun-jin, an associate professor at Kyunghee University's Department of Political Science, joining us in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in.
Hello, nice to see you.
We're also delighted to have Mason Ritchie, professor of international politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, joining us via Zoom. Welcome to the program.
Great, thanks for having me.
Professor Che, let's start with you. So South Korea became the first country to host the Summit for Democracy outside the U.S. What significance does this hold?
Yes, as you told, this is the first Summit for Democracy that is held outside the United States. And I think this is important for several reasons. The first reason is this summit sends a strong message that the push for democracy is a worldwide effort, not just by the United States. It means that many countries are coming together to talk about how to make sure the people have freedom and human rights. And secondly, the choosing South Korea as the venue has a special significance for East Asia. And this region, that East Asia, has a mix of government types, from democracy to autocracy, and also some countries in the process of transition. But South Korea has experienced a successful democratization and also economic growth. So South Korea can serve as a shining example of a successful democratization in this diverse landscape of East Asia. And third, South Korea hosting the summit can strengthen our bonds with the United States and also other democratic allies. So, for example, the White House National Security Council announced that the South Korea is a democracy fighter that has stood with the United States on the front line. So I believe this is a good opportunity to strengthen ties based on shared value, which is so important for addressing regional security issues, including threats from North Korea and also rising power of China. So in simple terms, it is a good opportunity for South Korea to show leadership and bring countries together to talk about freedom and rights.
A shining example, really,
right.
Isn't it?
Yes, it
South
is.
Korea's near miracle transformation from the rubbles of the Korean War to becoming the world's 10th largest economy. It still continues to inspire many developing countries. And as you've pointed out, the vast economic development was possible through the country's own democratization. Now, Professor Ritchie, 2024 is the year of elections. More than 2 billion people across 50 countries are expected to head to the polls this year, with some pundits saying this year may be democracy's biggest test ever. Does this add to the significance of this year's Summit for Democracy?
Yeah, sure. I don't really think that the Summit for Democracy itself is going to be, able to bolster democracy for the 2024 election cycles that we're seeing, as you quite rightly pointed out, in so many countries. But, I think it does mean that in some ways, perhaps more people and more nations as a whole are going to be aware of elections and democracy issues outside of their own country. And in that sense, perhaps the summit can plant a noticeable seed in future leaders for upholding democracy domestically, and of course linking democracies together. So I think that's one way of looking at it. I think that frankly there's a little bit of a sense in which the Summit for for Democracy can be, easily criticized perhaps by some other states. When you look at the fact that it is led by the United States, and yet in 2020, the United States' President Trump at the time, refused to concede his election defeat and ensure the peaceful transition of power, which is one of the fundamental aspects of democracy, and in fact is currently running his entire campaign, or at least a significant part of his current campaign, to become president again, on the demonstrably false claims that he lost the election. So I think that the Summit for Democracy has some weaknesses in terms of its ability to influence democratization worldwide, and some of those weaknesses start at the top. Looking at things perhaps a little bit the other way around, the Summit for Democracy, what can it do for South Korea? It does build on Korea's history of functioning as what we call a meaningful convening power. The power to convene meetings, to bring in states for these types of summits is a part of soft power. And, South Korea does have a history of that, going back to the G20 in 2010, the Nuclear Security Summit in 2012, and some other meetings along the way as well, including the UN Peacekeeping Ministerial in 2021. So I think that this, does bolster South Korea's bona fides as a significant convening power. It helps, you show other countries that, you have lots of friends and partners. And, this fits in with the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's desire to be what it refers to as a global pivotal state and think beyond simply its foreign affairs and security and defense affairs on and around the Korean Peninsula.
Right. Having the power to convene like-minded countries itself is quite significant, isn't it? Now, Dr. Che, ministerial-level officials from some 30 countries took part on the first day, centering on safeguarding democracy from the risks of AI and digital technology. President Yoon called for global solidarity to address the issue. And today, the focus was the civil society and the youth. Could you walk us through the highlights of the summit so far?
Okay, so ministers from 30 countries attended this three-day Summit for Democracy. And there are many issues were discussed during the meeting, but there are two key areas of mutual concern. The first one is the use of some fake news and disinformation and its impact on democracy. And for example, there was a famous fake news during the past US presidential election. It was the Pope Francis announced that his support for Donald Trump. And this widely dispersed to American voters. And actually some people believe that. So this example shows how fake news and disinformation may negatively affect the democratic process of many countries. So tomorrow, the President Yoon Suk-yeol will chair the plenary session of the summit. And during this meeting, the title of the session is Technology, Election, and Fake News. And he will send a clear warning message that we need to protect the democratic process, especially electoral system, from the threat of fake news and disinformation. And the second key area is the use of technology and artificial intelligence to steal some information and sensitive technology from other countries. And especially the Tony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, said on Monday that authoritarian regimes are using technology to undermine democracy and human rights. And we must ensure that technology upholds democratic values and norms, such as human rights and freedom. And this comment should be understood in the context of the recent concern that China is perhaps using commercial spyware to steal intellectual property and technological secrets from U.S. companies. So these two key areas, the using commercial spyware and also fake news and disinformation, are the key main areas of this Summit for Democracy.
And Professor Ritchie, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken attended sessions held on the first day of the summit, and as our Professor Che here mentioned, highlighting the need to protect democracy and human rights from authoritarian and oppressive regimes. He also briefly met with President Yoon and held talks with Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol. How do you assess the outcome of his visit?
You know, at least with respect to the Summit for Democracy and that aspect of Secretary Blinken's visit, substantively, not much is going to come out of their meeting other than the U.S. and South Korea underlining that they are like-minded states with shared political values. And of course, that's important. That's something that the United States and South Korea can hold up as a model, to be emulated by other states. And as I mentioned earlier, convening power matters, and it's a it's a sense in which South Korea can show that it has become powerful enough through its democratization, through its liberalization over time, to be able to hold this type of event. And so I think obviously that's important. Other things, of course, the Foreign Minister and Secretary of State Blinken talked about, as well as Blinken and President Yoon involved. The alliance, the sound fundamentals of the alliance. Obviously, criticism of North Korea, for its human rights abuses, for its lack of democracy, and for its violation of international law. And I think that's something that's important to think about too, is the sense in which states that have a solid rule of law, which is an important part of democracy, also tend to be states that are better at following international law, which feeds into peace and security in regions all over the world. I would say that Blinken's visit, obviously is good for Yoon in terms of showcasing the tight relationship that he has built between his administration and the Biden administration, the work that he has done to solidify the alliance with the United States, and that's obviously something that's important, to him personally. It's important to his administration, but it's also something that's certainly, I would imagine, going to be useful and a meaningful plank in the PPP's platform as it heads into the general election for the National Assembly on April 10th. So certainly there's some campaign value to come out of that. I think I would say as the last thing, there is a little bit of criticism perhaps of South Korea as well. Just like I criticized the United States earlier, South Korea in the VDEM statistics, is the only liberal democracy that has shown what they call the bell curve, which is to say a backsliding in democracy in recent years. So I think it's, at least I would hope, something that comes out of this Summit for Democracy is that even though South Korea is a consolidated democracy and has made a wonderful transition to becoming that consolidated democracy from an autocratic background, there is, of course, room for vigilance and room to make sure that it doesn't backslide in terms of its democratic credentials.
Blocking erosion of democracy is also an important dimension of the ongoing summit. Now, staying with you, Professor Ritchie, South Korea's hosting of the summit was sure to raise China's eyebrows as Taiwan's digital minister attended a session virtually on Monday. The Chinese foreign minister was quick to react, urging Seoul to respect one China principle and to stop providing, quote unquote, a platform for Taiwanese independence forces. How do you see this?
So this is the least surprising thing that has happened at the summit. Obviously, anytime Taiwan is invited to participate in multilateral meetings, even as a sort of tangential participant, Beijing gets upset and lodges these types of complaints. Audrey Tang's participation wasn't even live. It was video, and it was a pre-recorded message. This is just something that China does out of principle. It's also not the first time at the Summit for Democracy that Taiwan has been invited. In fact, it's been invited to each of the meetings that have taken place until now, and China has had the same message every time. So I wouldn't read too much into it. This isn't going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of Chinese irritation with South Korea. This is, I won't say pro forma. They really are upset about it. But this is something to be expected, and I know that South Korea will have factored this in to their calculation in deciding to invite Taiwan as a participant in this in the first place.
Seoul's foreign ministry just this afternoon responded that the summit is being held to contribute to promotion of democracy and human rights and does not target any specific country. It also added that it respects China's one policy, and that stance remains unchanged. Like you said, the friction was expected, but it surely was palpable, which leads to our next question. Dr. Che, how do you gauge the impact of the summit on future Seoul-Beijing relations? What would be a smart strategy for South Korea?
In the short term, it might upset China. So in the short term, China might respond with a diplomatic complaint or by putting some economic pressure on South Korea. But we must remember that China is a big deal for South Korea in its business and also for regional security. So what is a smart strategy for South Korea? I can suggest maybe two policies. The first, South Korea should talk with China before and after the meeting to explain its position and intention in hosting this kind of event. So if South Korea point out that the meeting is really about democracy and human rights and not being about against China, it could make China think more positively. And secondly, so South Korea could emphasize the importance of multilateralism and international cooperation in addressing the common challenges. So, for example, South Korea can position itself as a mediator for dialogue and regional security and economic issues. So it can reduce the negative impact of the Summit for Democracy and possibly other meetings on its relation with China. So in simple terms, the summit could make things difficult between South Korea and China. But however, a thoughtful strategist that engages China and emphasizes the importance of multilateral cooperation can help manage potential conflict between the two countries.
Well, striking the delicate balance between the U.S. and China has always been South Korea's key diplomatic challenge, hasn't it? Now, back to you, Dr. Ritchie. The summit is taking place amid heightened tensions surrounding the Korean peninsula. North Korea resumed its missile provocation despite Blinken's visit, while Russian President Putin, just before the country's presidential election, renewed his threat against the West that Russia is ready for a nuclear war. He also made claims that are widely interpreted as a recognition of the North as a de facto nuclear state. Now, against such a backdrop, what kind of message is expected toward Moscow, Pyongyang, and also toward Beijing during tomorrow's main session?
Sure. So, I'll start by saying, as you mentioned earlier, the Summit for Democracy participants, and South Korea included especially, have been at pains to say that this is a summit for democracy. It's not a summit against Beijing or against Moscow or against Pyongyang. If that's how those countries are going to read this, one can't prevent them from doing so. I think that the main response from the summit, the main message, let's say, from the Summit for Democracy, let's say collectively and of course diplomatically, is going to be that human rights must be respected, not because a state deigns to do so, but because human rights are universal rights. And human rights are the rights of all people everywhere. And this isn't something that is only suitable for democracies, but that it is in fact something that is intended for and a right of all human beings by virtue of being humans. Secondly, I think the message is going to be that democracies are going to defend themselves against disinformation and hybrid warfare that undermine their states and their political systems. Again, there may not be a particular recipient of this, but obviously the state that tends to engage in this behavior most is Russia, but obviously other states, including North Korea and China, engage in this type of disinformation as well. So I think that one of the messages really going out to the sort of problematic triangle of Beijing, Pyongyang, and Moscow is that democracies are going to defend themselves, that they're going to try to find a way to work with each other and domestically within their own states to shore up the defenses that they have, or at least that they're going to try. And this is becoming more challenging, which is part of the reason why you are having this summit, which aims at international cooperation in the first place. And we know from the first day, for instance, with the discussion on artificial intelligence, that this is artificial intelligence is going to provide risks and opportunities for democracies to remain solid, but also, unfortunately, to be subject to certain vulnerabilities. And so part of the point of these types of messages is that democratic states are going to share ideas and best practices for how they can strategically approach these questions. And one would hope, at least, that part of the message is going to be that Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang should get the message that they're not simply going to be able to infiltrate the democratic systems of the states represented at the summit.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for tonight, but the summit continues. The main session will be held tomorrow, parts of which will be presided over by President Yoon. Thank you so much, Professor Ritchie and Professor Che, for sharing your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in at same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.